I love you, Emily. 2 years will fly by, I promise. My husband, Clark, leaned in for one last kiss at the gate, his eyes radiating a level of sincerity that could have fooled an Oscar judge. I waved back, tears streaming down my face, my chin trembling in the ultimate performance of a devastated wife. But those weren't tears of heartbreak. They were 14 days of swallowed rage finally screaming to get out. I'm Emily Miller. As a title examiner, I spend my days hunting for lies hidden in legal fine print. But 2 weeks ago, I found the biggest fraud of all, sitting right on Clark's laptop. He wasn't flying to New York for a career-making promotion. He was moving into a luxury Park Slope brownstone with a woman named Ashley, planning to use my grandmother's life savings to bankroll their happily ever after. He thought he was soaring toward a fresh start. What he didn't realize was that the second his plane cleared the runway, I was heading straight to the bank to make sure our $375,000 savings account vanished from his reach forever. I'm about to show you exactly how I dismantled my husband's double life before his flight even touched down in NYC. But before we get to the fallout, I want to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Drop your city and time in the comments below. And if you're here for some cold, hard justice, hit that subscribe button and join us. Let's get into the evidence. It all started with a craving for chicken pot pie. Isn't it funny how the most mundane moments can trigger a total collapse of your reality? It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 14 days before Clark's scheduled departure. He was out at a farewell dinner with his colleagues, or so he said, and I was home alone, looking to print a recipe I'd saved. My phone was dead, so I reached for Clark's laptop on the kitchen counter. It was open, the screen glowing softly in the dim light. I've spent 12 years as a title examiner. My entire career is built on the philosophy that people lie, but documents don't. I'm trained to spot the one missing signature, the forged date, or the tiny inconsistency that proves a title is dirty. I never thought I'd be applying those skills to my own marriage at 8:04 p.m. on a Tuesday. When I tapped the trackpad, I didn't see a recipe. I saw a minimized Chrome tab. I clicked it by accident, and my world went cold. It was a street-easy listing for a 2-bedroom apartment on Fifth Avenue in Park Slope, Brooklyn. Exposed brick, hardwood floors, $3,400 a month. The move-in date? April 14th, the exact day Clark was supposed to leave for his company housing in Midtown. My hands started to shake, but my professional brain took over. I noticed another tab. An open Gmail window. It was an email from someone named Ashley Vance. The subject line was just a single heart emoji. The message read, "Our new place is perfect, Clark. I already picked out the West Elm couch. I can't wait to wake up next to you every single morning without looking over my shoulder. I love you." I sat there for what felt like an eternity, the blue light of the screen washing over me. For 7 years, I thought I had a quiet, stable marriage. I thought Clark was a project engineer working long hours for our future. In reality, he was an architect building a life I wasn't invited to. This is the moment where most people would have picked up the phone and screamed. Most people would have waited by the door with a suitcase and a heart full of fire. But I'm not most people. I'm a title examiner. In my world, the person who reacts first loses leverage. The person who screams without proof is just crazy. But the person who has the paperwork, that person wins. I became a ghost in my own kitchen. I didn't call him. I didn't cry. Instead, I grabbed my phone, which had finally flickered back to life, and I began to document. I took high-resolution photos of every email. I screenshotted the apartment listing. I dug through the browser history and found months of weekend getaways to places like Cold Spring and Charlotte. Trips he told me were for on-site inspections. They weren't inspections. They were rehearsals for his new life with Ashley. When I heard his truck pull into the driveway, I didn't flinch. I closed the tabs, put the laptop back exactly where I found it, and sat down with a glass of water. When he walked in, smelling like expensive steak and lies, he kissed my forehead and asked about my night. "I found that pot pie recipe," I told him, forcing a smile that felt like glass in my mouth. "I'll make it for you tomorrow." He told me I was the best wife a guy could ask for. I just nodded. Because while he was planning his escape to Brooklyn, I was already filing the paperwork for his funeral. Legally speaking, of course. I knew right then, He was playing a game of emotions, but I was playing a game of evidence. And in North Carolina, the person with the better paper trail always gets the last laugh. The next few days were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I didn't just play the role of the supportive wife, I became her. I made that chicken pot pie the next night, watching Clark eat every bite while he raved about his promotion. It's terrifying how easily a man can look you in the eye and describe a future that doesn't include you, all while chewing on a crust you spent 2 hours crimping by hand. But while he was busy dreaming of Brooklyn, I was digging into the dirt. As a title examiner, I have access to databases and a network of professionals who know how to find the red flags buried in a person's history. I called in a few favors, and what I found didn't just break my heart, nauseated me. The first thread I pulled was his job at the engineering firm. I called a contact there under the guise of checking on insurance paperwork for his New York move. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. "Emily," my contact whispered, "Clark doesn't work here anymore. He was let go 5 months ago over some, let's just say, expense discrepancies. We thought he'd already told you." 5 months. For over 150 days, this man had put on a button-down shirt, kissed me goodbye, and driven where? To a Starbucks parking lot? To Ashley's arms? He had been running a full-time campaign of deception, pretending to have a career that had actually ended in disgrace. But Clark wasn't just a liar. He was a predator. The deeper I dug into our own property records, the more I realized he was trying to bleed me dry before he vanished. I pulled a title search on our own home on Bristow Lane, the house I found, the house I negotiated, the house I considered my sanctuary. There it was. A recent application for a $150,000 home equity line of credit, HELOC. My blood turned to ice. To get a loan like that, you need 2 signatures. I looked at the digital copy of the application, and there it was. Emily Miller, written in a shaky, slanted hand that tried so hard to look like mine. He had forged my name. He was trying to borrow 6 figures against the roof over my head to fund his fresh start with Ashley. He wanted to leave me with a broken heart and a mountain of debt. The bank had flagged the signature as inconsistent and denied the loan 4 weeks prior. That was the only reason we weren't already underwater. He had failed at Plan A, so he moved to Plan B, the New York assignment and the slow drain of our $375,000 joint savings account. I sat in my car in the office parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The rage was no longer leaking out of me. It was a cold, hard diamond in my chest. Most people would have confronted him then. They would have burned his clothes in the driveway. But I knew better. In the eyes of the law, a confrontation is just he said, she said. But a forged document? A secret termination? Those are weapons. I called Laura Sterling, the sharpest divorce attorney in North Carolina. I told her, "I don't just want a divorce, I want a surgical extraction." I also hired David, a private investigator with a military background. Within 48 hours, he sent me a folder that felt like a lead weight. Photos of Clark and Ashley at a boutique in Charlotte. Clark buying her a gold pendant. Clark laughing over wine at a bed and breakfast while I was home thinking he was grinding at the office. But the most painful part? A photo of Clark having lunch with his mother, Martha. They weren't just eating. They were looking at a printed map of Brooklyn. Martha, the woman who told me I was like a daughter to her, was helping him navigate his exit strategy. She wasn't just a bystander, she was an accomplice. I looked at the photos, the forged loan, and the termination papers. I had everything I needed. I just had to wait for that plane to take off. Because as any good examiner knows, you don't stop a fraud while it's happening. You wait until the paper trail is long enough to hang them with it. The morning of the airport goodbye was the longest 4 hours of my life. I stood there at the terminal, smelling the Armani cologne I'd bought Clark for our anniversary, and I didn't flinch. When he squeezed my hand and told me he'd count down the days until our first visit, I nodded. I gave him the trembling chin and the teary eyes. I watched him walk through security, waving one last time before disappearing toward a life he thought I was too stupid to see coming. The second his olive green duffel bag vanished past the TSA checkpoint, the heartbroken wife died. I walked to the parking lot, got in my car, and I didn't go home. I didn't go to work. I drove straight to Brunswick County Federal Credit Union. I was there before the doors even opened, sitting in my car with my hands at 10 and 2, watching the clock like a sniper. When the lights flickered on, I walked inside and sat down with Patricia. She's a sweet woman who keeps butterscotch candies on her desk and has known us for years. She smiled at me, thinking I was just there for a routine check. I need to transfer the balance of our joint savings into a new personal account, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's. Now please. Patricia didn't blink. I was a joint account holder. It was my legal right. But as I watched her fingers tap the keys, my heart was hammering against my ribs. We were talking about $375,000. Now, let's be clear about that money. $258,000 of it was my grandmother's legacy, Irene Pennington's life's work. My grandmother was the kind of woman who would drive 20 miles to save 11 cents on canned beans. She lived in a tiny house, drove the same Buick for 2 decades, and saved every penny so I would never have to depend on a man for my survival. Never leave your money where your husband can find it, she'd told me. I should have listened on my wedding day. But as Patricia hit the enter key, I finally made Irene proud. In 20 minutes, 7 years of shared history and a lifetime of my family's sacrifice were moved out of Clark's reach. He was currently 30,000 feet in the air, probably sipping a ginger ale and dreaming of the West Elm furniture he'd buy with my money. He had no idea he was landing with a net worth of 0. From the bank, I drove straight to Laura Sterling's office. I didn't just file for divorce. I filed an emergency motion to protect marital assets. I handed her the gift from New York, the folder from David, the PI. It had the photos of Clark and Ashley, the records of him spending thousands on Tiffany pendants, and the evidence of his secret termination. But the nuclear option was the forged HELOC application. When Laura saw the shaky imitation of my signature, she looked up and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the look of a shark that just caught the scent of blood in the water. "Emily," she said, leaning back, "he didn't just break your heart. He committed document fraud against a title examiner. This isn't a divorce anymore. It's a settlement slaughter." I went home to our house on Bristow Lane, the house Clark tried to steal from under me. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I'd found the laptop, and I waited. I knew the honeymoon phase in Brooklyn was about to hit a brick wall. Clark had exactly $3,000 in his personal checking account. New York City eats $3,000 for breakfast. He was counting on our joint savings to pay for the Park Slope rent, the utilities, and Ashley's expensive tastes. He thought I was his safety net. He didn't realize I'd turned that net into a noose. The silence lasted exactly 5 weeks. During that time, Clark played his part to perfection. He'd call me every evening from the office in New York, complaining about the subway noise or describing the boring corporate housing he was staying in. I'd sit on our sofa, stroking the ears of my new dog, Hank, and I'd listen. I'd ask about his project. I'd tell him I missed him. I was so good at the supportive wife act that I almost started to pity him. Almost. But while he was lying, I was recording. In North Carolina, you only need one person's consent to record a call, and I definitely gave myself permission. I had hours of him on tape, building a mountain of perjury with every sentence. The collapse happened on a Tuesday. Clark was in Brooklyn, probably sitting on that new West Elm couch with Ashley, when he finally decided it was time to dip into our nest egg. He opened his banking app, expecting to see a 6-figure cushion. Instead, he saw a 0.10 hours. My phone started blowing up 10 minutes later. 17 missed calls in 2 hours. Clark hadn't called me 17 times in the last 7 years combined. Not for birthdays, not for anniversaries, but threaten a man's access to $375,000, and suddenly you're the most important person on the planet. The texts followed. "Emily, what happened to the savings? Pick up the phone. This isn't funny. Call me back now. I didn't answer. I called Laura Sterling instead. He knows, I said. Send him the welcome package. The next morning, a process server knocked on the door of the Park Slope brownstone. Clark opened it, likely expecting a delivery. Instead, he got a manila envelope containing a petition for divorce, an emergency asset freeze, and the evidence of his own fraud. David, my PI, was parked across the street, filming the whole thing as Clark's face went from pale to ghostly white. 2 hours later, I finally picked up. Clark didn't even say hello. He was screaming. He called me a thief. He told me I had no right to his money. Actually, Clark, I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning in the mountains, that money is my grandmother's legacy. And as for the rest, we'll let a judge decide how much you're owed after we discuss the $150,000 loan you tried to forge my name on. There was a sudden, heavy silence on the line, the sound of a man realizing he'd brought a knife to a gunfight with a title examiner. Then came the final domino. Ashley. I didn't have to do much. I just sent Ashley a LinkedIn message with a few select attachments. The photos of Clark and me from a month ago, his termination papers showing he was unemployed, and a copy of our very much active marriage certificate. Ashley wasn't a villain. She was another one of Clark's marks. When she realized her successful engineer boyfriend was actually a broke, unemployed fraudster with a wife and a pending criminal inquiry, she didn't just dump him, she sent me every text he'd ever sent her about selling our house and leaving his crazy wife. Even his mother, Martha, checked the wind and realized it was blowing toward a courtroom. To save her own reputation in Southport, she sent a signed statement to my lawyer, admitting she knew about the affair and the fake job. She threw her own son under the bus to keep her boutique from being associated with his scandal. The final settlement meeting was short. Clark sat across from me, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He had no job, no girlfriend, and no mother in his corner. Laura slid the folder of evidence across the table, the forged HELOC, the PI photos, the recordings. You can sign this agreement, which gives Emily the house and the inheritance, Laura said, or we can take this to the district attorney and talk about bank fraud. He signed. He didn't even look me in the eye. Today, the walls of my house are sage green, my choice. The magnolia tree is still dropping leaves, and Hank is snoring at my feet. Clark is living in a weekly rate motel, trying to explain to the bank why he has no income. I learned two things from this. Grandma Irene was right about the money, and never ever try to outlie a woman who reads legal fine print for a living. Today my home is painted sage green, my choice, not his. As I sit here with Hank, I've realized that the greatest title search I ever performed was on my own life. The lesson is simple. In a world of pretty lies, always keep your receipts and your independence. If this story reminded you that you're stronger than you think, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors. What's your take on Clark's New York dream turning into a nightmare? Let's talk in the comments. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.